The rain hit my face so hard it felt like tiny needles slicing across my skin. "Take that baby and get out of my car." My husband's voice exploded through the truck just before the passenger door flew open beside me. For one frozen second, I honestly thought Travis was bluffing. Couples fight, right? People say horrible things when they're angry. That's what I kept telling myself, while clutching my newborn tighter against my chest, beneath the thin hospital blanket, already soaked from the storm. But then I looked into his eyes, and something inside me shattered. There was no hesitation there, no guilt, no love, just cold exhaustion, like he had already erased me from his life, long before this moment. Thunder cracked above the Oklahoma highway as rain slammed against the windshield. "Please," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's freezing. She's just a baby." Travis tightened both hands around the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. I said, "Get out." My heart stopped. I searched his face for some sign that this was temporary, some tiny spark of the man I married, but all I saw was anger twisted together with relief. Relief that he was finally done with me. The next thing I knew, my shoes hit wet gravel. Rain immediately drenched my sweater, while icy wind cut through my skin. I nearly lost my balance, trying to protect my daughter from the storm. Then the truck door slammed shut. Red brake lights flashed once through the darkness, and Travis drove away without looking back. Just like that. My marriage ended on the side of a highway. I stood there shaking beside the empty road while cars sped past without slowing down. Nobody stopped. Nobody rolled down a window. My daughter started crying beneath the blanket. Tiny, desperate cries that made pure terror explode inside my chest. Because one horrifying thought kept repeating over and over in my mind: my baby could die out here tonight. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped my phone trying to call Travis. Straight to voicemail. Again and again. By the sixth call, panic had turned into disbelief. How could someone abandon their own child in the middle of a storm? Desperate, I called his mother instead. Diane answered with an annoyed sigh, as if I had interrupted something important. The moment I told her what happened, silence filled the line for half a second before she laughed softly. "Maybe this will teach you to stop acting helpless all the time," she muttered coldly before hanging up. I just stood there staring at my phone while rainwater dripped down my face like tears I was too numb to cry. That was the exact moment I realized something terrifying: they never planned to come back for us. Then through the storm behind me, headlights slowly appeared on the highway. A dark luxury car pulled onto the shoulder beside me, and the driver rolled down his window. The older man behind the wheel stared at me with a look that made my stomach twist instantly. Not pity, not surprise, recognition. And when he stepped out into the rain and whispered, "Oh my God, it's really you," I realized being abandoned on that highway was only the beginning of the nightmare. If this story already has you holding your breath, make sure to subscribe and stay with us for the next chapter. Because what Emily discovers about her past will change everything you think you know about this family forever. "I should have let you freeze out there." Those were the words that kept echoing in Emily's head long after Diane hung up the phone. Not because they were shouted, but because they were spoken so casually, so coldly, like abandoning a mother and newborn in the middle of a storm was completely normal. Emily stood beside the highway, shaking violently, while rainwater soaked through the hospital blanket wrapped around her baby. Every passing car sprayed dirty water across the gravel shoulder, but nobody stopped. Nobody cared. Her daughter's tiny cries were growing weaker against her chest, and panic tightened around Emily's throat like a rope. She tried calling Travis again, straight to voicemail. Again, nothing. It was like he had erased them from existence the moment he drove away. Desperate and nearly numb from the cold, Emily forced herself to start walking toward the flickering lights of a gas station barely visible down the highway. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her shoes slipped in mud. Her arms ached from holding the baby tightly beneath her soaked sweater. But the worst pain wasn't physical. It was the realization that the family she had spent years sacrificing herself for never truly loved her at all. Memories flooded her mind between thunderclaps. Cooking Thanksgiving dinner alone, while Diane criticized everything she touched. Sitting beside Diane during endless hospital visits, while Travis always found excuses not to come. Smiling through insults at family gatherings just to keep the peace. Emily had spent years trying to become good enough for them, convincing herself that if she worked harder, loved harder, stayed quieter, eventually they would accept her. But standing in the freezing rain that night, she finally understood the truth. Some people only love you when you make their lives easier. The moment you become vulnerable, inconvenient, exhausted, or afraid, they treat you like a burden they can throw away. Her baby suddenly let out a weak, choking cry that snapped Emily back to reality. Terror exploded inside her chest. She quickly pulled back the blanket just enough to see the baby's tiny face, pale from the cold wind. "No, no, no," Emily whispered desperately, holding her daughter closer. "Stay with Mommy. Please stay with me." Tears mixed with rainwater as she stumbled faster toward the distant gas station lights. But then headlights appeared behind her, bright white headlights, slow, watching. Emily froze instantly. Every warning she had ever heard screamed through her mind. Woman alone, empty highway, middle of the night. She tightened her grip around the baby as a silver BMW rolled slowly beside her and stopped. The passenger window lowered halfway. An older man sat behind the wheel, staring at her with a look she couldn't understand. Not curiosity, not pity, shock, real shock. His face had gone completely pale. Emily's heartbeat pounded violently in her ears. "Please," she said, immediately backing away from the car, "just leave us alone." But the man barely seemed to hear her. His eyes locked onto her face, as if he had seen a ghost standing in the rain. Then his gaze shifted downward toward the baby in her arms, and something inside his expression broke completely. He stepped out into the storm slowly with both hands visible, careful not to frighten her. "Oh my God," he whispered shakily. After all these years, Emily's stomach tightened instantly. Every instinct told her to run. But before she could move, the stranger reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old photograph protected inside a plastic sleeve. Even through the darkness and rain, Emily could clearly see the picture: a little girl with curly brown hair, gray eyes, and a small scar above her eyebrow, identical to her own. The stranger's voice trembled as he stared directly at her. "Her name was Amelia Whitmore," he whispered. "And I think you're my missing niece." If you think this story is already unbelievable, the next part changes everything. Comment number 1 below if you're ready to uncover the terrifying secret hidden behind Emily's real identity and the family that spent decades searching for her. "You're telling me I've been missing for my entire life?" Emily's voice barely came out above a whisper as the silver BMW cut through the storm toward the lake house. The baby slept weakly against her chest, beneath layers of blankets the stranger had wrapped around them moments earlier. But Emily couldn't stop shaking. Every instinct still screamed that she should never have gotten into a stranger's car. Yet something about the man behind the wheel felt impossible to ignore. The way he kept glancing at her through the mirror. The way his hands trembled whenever he looked at the old photograph lying on the passenger seat beside him. And most terrifying of all, the way he looked at her like someone seeing a miracle after decades of grief. "I know how insane this sounds," the man said quietly, over the sound of rain hitting the windshield. "But when I saw your face tonight, I thought my heart stopped." Emily tightened her hold around her daughter instantly. "Who are you?" she asked carefully. The man swallowed hard before answering. "My name is Daniel Whitmore." The last name sent a strange chill through her body. Whitmore, the same name written beneath the little girl's photograph. Emily looked down again at the image resting near the dashboard. Curly brown hair, gray eyes, tiny scar above the eyebrow. It felt like staring at a childhood memory buried so deeply inside her mind that touching it almost hurt physically. "You said her name was Amelia," Emily whispered. Daniel nodded slowly, while gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Amelia Rose Whitmore." Silence filled the car. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark Oklahoma sky, while rain blurred the empty highway into streaks of silver light. Emily's breathing became uneven. Suddenly, fragments of memories flashed through her mind like broken glass. Smoke. A woman screaming. Someone calling a name that wasn't Emily. Amelia. She pressed her hand against her forehead, dizzy. "I don't understand," she whispered shakily. "I was adopted when I was little. That's all I know." Daniel's expression darkened with pain. "Because someone made sure you would never know the truth." Emily looked up sharply. "What truth?" For several seconds, Daniel didn't answer. It looked like he was trying to decide how much he could say without destroying her completely. Finally, he exhaled slowly. More than 20 years ago, my niece disappeared after a courthouse fire destroyed custody records connected to our family. Emily's stomach tightened. And you think that niece is me? Daniel glanced toward her in the mirror, eyes filled with emotion. I know it's you. Emily immediately shook her head. No, this is crazy. But even as she denied it, something deep inside her began unraveling. Her entire life had always felt disconnected somehow, like she never truly belonged anywhere. Foster homes, temporary families, adoption papers with missing details no one ever explained. Questions nobody wanted to answer. And now a stranger was sitting in front of her, telling her that maybe her entire identity had been stolen before she was old enough to remember. The BMW finally turned onto a narrow private road, surrounded by dark trees, before stopping beside a massive lake house, glowing warmly against the storm. Emily hesitated the moment Daniel opened her door. You don't have to trust me yet, he said softly. But please let me help your daughter. That sentence broke something inside her, because despite everything that happened tonight, he was the first person who seemed more worried about her baby than himself. Emily slowly stepped out of the car and followed him inside. The warmth hit her instantly. A fire crackled inside a stone fireplace, while soft yellow lights illuminated the enormous living room. But then Emily froze completely. Hanging above the fireplace was a framed photograph of a smiling woman standing beside Daniel, and she looked exactly like Emily. Same eyes, same smile, same face. Emily's knees nearly buckled. Daniel followed her stare before speaking words that changed everything forever. That woman, he whispered carefully, is your mother. If this shocking discovery gave you chills, don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next chapter reveals the terrifying secret behind Emily's disappearance, and why powerful people spent decades hiding the truth. What if your entire childhood was stolen, and the people responsible were still alive? Emily couldn't stop staring at the photograph above the fireplace. The woman's smile looked painfully familiar. Not in the way strangers sometimes resemble each other, but in the terrifying way mirrors do. Same gray eyes, same curve of the lips, even the tiny dimple near the cheek was identical to hers. The warmth of the lake house suddenly felt suffocating. Her hands trembled while holding her sleeping daughter tighter against her chest. No, she whispered shakily. This can't be real. Daniel stood quietly near the fireplace, watching her with the exhausted sadness of someone carrying grief for decades. I know this is overwhelming, he said softly, but your mother spent her entire life searching for you. Emily slowly turned toward him. Then why didn't she find me? That question seemed to hit Daniel harder than anything else. He removed his glasses and rubbed both hands over his face before answering. Because somebody made sure every trail disappeared. Silence swallowed the room. Outside, rain hammered against the windows, while wind moved across the dark lake beyond the glass. Emily's pulse pounded violently in her ears. Start from the beginning, she demanded quietly. Daniel nodded once before sitting down across from her. Your father died in a boating accident. When you were very young, he began carefully. After that, your mother Claire fell apart for a while. Depression, medication, alcohol. Emily's stomach tightened as he spoke. My family used that against her, Daniel continued bitterly. The Whitmores cared more about reputation than compassion. They believed Claire was too unstable to raise you. Emily felt sick listening to it. Somewhere deep inside, fragments of emotions she didn't fully understand began surfacing. Fear, confusion, loneliness. Daniel leaned forward slightly. They tried to take custody legally first, he explained, but the court ruled in your mother's favor. Emily swallowed hard. Then how did I disappear? Daniel's expression darkened instantly. 3 weeks after the custody, hearing the courthouse storing your records caught fire. Emily froze. What officials claimed thousands of files were destroyed, Daniel said grimly, including yours. A chill ran through her body. The next morning, he continued slowly. Your mother woke up and discovered both you and your nanny were gone. Emily stopped breathing for a second. Gone, Daniel nodded painfully. The nanny disappeared without a trace. Police assumed she kidnapped you, but nothing about the case ever made sense. Emily's thoughts spiraled violently. Every answer only created more terrifying questions. You think someone paid her to take me? She whispered. Daniel looked straight into her eyes. I think powerful people were terrified your mother would eventually win custody permanently. Emily stood abruptly and walked toward the window, struggling to breathe normally. The storm outside reflected faintly across the dark lake, while memories flickered through her mind like broken flashes from another life. A woman singing softly. Smoke in the air. Someone carrying her while she cried, then nothing. Just emptiness stretching across decades. All my life, Emily whispered. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. Daniel's voice cracked slightly behind her. Because part of you always knew something was missing. Tears finally spilled down her face. Not just because of the possibility that her identity had been stolen, but because somewhere out there was a mother who never stopped searching for her. 20 years of birthdays, holidays, grief, hope. Emily slowly turned back toward the photograph above the fireplace. Does she know you found me? She asked quietly. Daniel hesitated too long. Her stomach tightened instantly. No, he admitted softly. Not yet. Emily stared at him in disbelief. Why would you keep this from her? Daniel's eyes filled with pain. Because, after all these years, I need to be absolutely certain before I break her heart again. The room fell silent. Then suddenly crash glass exploded somewhere downstairs. Emily jumped violently while her baby startled awake, crying in her arms. Daniel whipped toward the hallway, in face draining of color. Stay here, he ordered sharply. But before he could move, they both realized something horrifying at the exact same moment. The folder containing Emily's adoption records was gone. What do you think really happened to Emily all those years ago? Was she kidnapped for money, family power, or something even darker? Comment your theory below, because the next chapter uncovers the terrifying truth hiding inside the Whitmore family. Someone broke into the house, just to steal Emily's past. The realization hit like ice water the moment Daniel saw the empty space on the kitchen counter, where the adoption file had been sitting only minutes earlier. Emily stood frozen upstairs, holding her crying daughter against her chest, while fear spread through her body so violently she could barely breathe. The sound of shattered glass still echoed through the lake house, somewhere outside. Footsteps crashed through wet leaves near the shoreline before disappearing into the darkness. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside without hesitation. Lock the door behind me, he shouted. Emily slammed the bedroom door shut the second he disappeared downstairs. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she pushed a chair beneath the doorknob. The baby cried harder, sensing her panic. It's okay, Emily whispered shakily while rocking her daughter close. Mommy's here. But the truth was, she had never felt less safe in her entire life. Less than 24 hours ago, she believed the worst thing that could happen was losing her marriage. Now, strangers were breaking into houses, searching for files connected to her childhood disappearance. Nothing about her life made sense anymore. Her phone suddenly vibrated in her pocket, making her nearly scream. Travis. Emily stared at his name flashing across the screen with disbelief. After abandoning her and their daughter beside a highway, he was calling again. For one terrible moment, she considered ignoring it. But then another thought crept into her mind. What if he already knew where she was? Slowly, Emily answered the call. Travis sounded irritated immediately. Where the hell are you? Emily's grip tightened around the phone. You left us to die in a storm. He sighed dramatically. Emily, stop being so dramatic. The same word again. Dramatic. The word Travis and his mother used every single time Emily cried, questioned them, or begged for help. Suddenly, she realized something horrifying. They had trained her to doubt her own pain. Our daughter could have died, Emily whispered. Travis went silent for a second before muttering coldly, but she didn't. Emily felt sick. No guilt. No apology. Nothing. Then his tone shifted strangely. Look, he said more carefully. Mom says people are asking questions already, so just come home. Emily frowned instantly. What people? Silence. Too long. Travis quickly changed the subject. You can't survive on your own with a baby, he snapped. Stop embarrassing everyone and come back before this gets worse. Emily slowly looked toward the locked bedroom door while rain battered the windows outside. Suddenly, every instinct screamed. The same warning inside her head. Travis was scared. Not angry, not guilty. Scared. How do you know where I am? She asked quietly. Another pause. Then Travis laughed softly, but the sound felt wrong somehow. Forced. Nervous. Mom has friends, he muttered before disconnecting the call. Emily's stomach twisted violently. Downstairs, the front door finally opened again. Daniel returned soaked from the rain, breathing heavily. "They're gone," he said grimly. Emily immediately stepped toward him. "Who were they?" Daniel removed his wet coat slowly. "Two people wearing masks. One distracted me outside, while the other searched the house." Emily's face drained of color. For the file, Daniel nodded once. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Fear settled over the room, like poison. Emily looked down at her daughter sleeping against her shoulder, and suddenly understood something terrifying. This wasn't some forgotten family mystery buried in the past. Somebody powerful still cared enough to hide the truth. Daniel walked toward the fireplace and opened a locked drawer hidden beneath the shelves. He pulled out several old newspaper clippings and carefully handed them to Emily. Her hands shook while reading the headlines. "Missing child presumed dead after courthouse fire. Search for Whitmore Hyras ends in tragedy." Emily stopped breathing. Beneath one article was a grainy photograph of a little girl smiling beside a woman Emily now recognized instantly as Claire, her biological mother. "Oh my God," Emily whispered. Daniel looked at her with exhausted sadness. "Your mother never stopped looking for you. If this shocking truth just changed everything for you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next chapter reveals why powerful people may have stolen Emily's identity, and why they're suddenly desperate to silence her now. What if the people who destroyed your childhood were sitting in courtrooms, signing legal documents, pretending to protect children?" Emily couldn't sleep after reading the newspaper clippings Daniel showed her. Every headline felt like another crack splitting open the life she thought she understood. Missing child. Courthouse fire. Sealed records. Illegal adoption suspicions. The words repeated endlessly inside her head, while she sat awake beside her daughter's bassinet, listening to the storm fade outside the lake house windows. By morning, exhaustion hung over her like a weight she could barely carry. But Daniel looked even worse. He stood in the kitchen holding a coffee cup with trembling hands, while staring down at several old legal files spread across the counter. "You found something," Emily said quietly. Daniel nodded slowly. "Not me," he muttered. "Rebecca did." A few minutes later, the family attorney arrived, carrying a thick folder stuffed with archived court records. Rebecca Sloan looked calm on the outside, but the tension in her eyes immediately told Emily the news was bad. Very bad. Rebecca began carefully, after sitting down at the kitchen table. "Have you ever seen your original birth certificate?" Emily frowned. "No. Only copies from the adoption agency." Rebecca exchanged a glance with Daniel before opening the folder. "That's a problem." Emily's stomach tightened instantly. Rebecca slid several photocopied documents across the table. "The social worker listed on your adoption paperwork died under criminal investigation 12 years ago." Emily blinked in confusion. Investigation for what? Rebecca hesitated briefly. Fraud. Illegal child placements. Tampering with sealed family court records. The room suddenly felt colder. Emily stared at the documents without speaking. Every sentence seemed impossible yet horrifyingly real at the same time. Names blacked out, missing signatures, altered dates, entire pages replaced. "You're saying my adoption might have been fake?" Emily whispered. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "I'm saying somebody worked very hard to erase your real identity." Daniel slammed his hand against the counter in frustration. "I knew it," he muttered bitterly. "I knew the courthouse fire wasn't random." Emily looked between them anxiously. "Wait. You think the fire was planned?" Rebecca nodded grimly. "The timing is suspicious. Your mother wins custody rights. 3 weeks later, the courthouse burns. The next day, you disappear." Emily's chest tightened painfully. Suddenly she remembered something strange from her childhood. Not a clear memory. Just flashes. A woman arguing loudly. Someone saying she can never get the child back. Emily pressed both hands against her temples. "Oh my God." Rebecca leaned forward carefully. "Emily, we believe there may have been an organized network involved." Emily looked up sharply. "What kind of network?" Daniel answered quietly before Rebecca could. "Rich families, judges, social workers, attorneys." Emily froze. Daniel's voice hardened. People with money and influence who believed they had the right to decide which parents deserved children and which didn't. The horror of it hit Emily all at once. She had spent her entire life believing she was unwanted, abandoned, forgotten, but the truth was far worse. Someone had stolen her from a mother who fought to keep her. Rebecca carefully pulled out another document. We also found evidence that several adoption records connected to your case vanished after the fire. Emily looked down at the papers. How many children? She whispered. Rebecca went silent for a moment, before answering softly. We don't know yet. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Emily glanced toward her daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room and suddenly felt sick imagining how many other mothers may have lost children the same way. Why now? She asked finally. Why are people suddenly panicking after all these years? Daniel and Rebecca exchanged another look. Then Daniel spoke quietly. Because somebody realized you survived. Emily's blood ran cold. You mean they thought I was dead? Rebecca nodded once. According to the public records, Amelia Whitmore died shortly after the courthouse fire. Emily stopped breathing. Her entire existence had been erased before she was even old enough to understand what was happening. Daniel leaned closer, voice low and serious. Which means whoever stole you never expected you to come back. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the lake again, as Emily slowly looked down at her sleeping daughter. And for the first time in her life, she understood something terrifying. This wasn't just family betrayal. It was a conspiracy powerful enough to erase a child forever. The man who abandoned Emily on the highway was now trying to take her baby away. The moment Rebecca said the words emergency custody filing, Emily felt the room spin around her. She sat frozen at the kitchen table while her daughter slept peacefully in a bassinet nearby, completely unaware that a legal battle was already forming around her future. That's impossible, Emily whispered. Travis left us to die. Rebecca's expression remained calm but serious. And now he's preparing to claim that you're mentally unstable. The sentence hit harder than any scream ever could. Emily stared at her in disbelief, what Daniel swore under his breath, and turned away in disgust. Rebecca opened another folder filled with printed messages and legal notes. His attorney is building a case around postpartum emotional distress, she explained carefully. Lack of sleep, emotional instability, sudden disappearance with the child. Emily felt physically sick, listening to her own trauma, being transformed into evidence against her. He abandoned us during a storm, she said shakily. How can he possibly think this will work? Rebecca hesitated for a second before answering honestly. Because people like Travis don't usually see themselves as villains. Silence filled the kitchen. Emily slowly looked down at her trembling hands while memories flooded back one after another. Every argument where Travis called her too emotional. Every time Diane accused her of overreacting. Every moment they made her feel weak for crying, exhausted for struggling, dramatic for asking for help. Suddenly, Emily understood something terrifying. They hadn't just mistreated her, they had been preparing her entire marriage to doubt herself. Her phone rang again before anyone could speak further. Travis. Rebecca nodded toward the screen. Answer it. Emily swallowed hard and put the call on speaker. Travis sounded irritated immediately. Where the hell are you now? Emily's voice came out colder than she expected. Safe. A bitter laugh came through the phone. You're really doing this. Doing what? She snapped. Surviving after you abandoned us, Travis exhaled sharply. Emily, you're twisting everything. Daniel looked ready to explode. Rebecca quietly kept taking notes. You threw your wife and newborn out onto a highway in the middle of a storm, Emily said, struggling to stay calm. And now you're pretending I'm the problem. Travis stayed silent for a second before lowering his voice. I was angry. Emily almost laughed at the absurdity. Angry people punch walls, Travis. They don't abandon babies. That sentence seemed to hit him harder than expected, because for the first time his confidence cracked slightly. But only for a moment. Mom already talked to a lawyer, he muttered. If you keep acting unstable, this could get ugly fast. Emily's blood ran cold. You think I'm unstable? Travis sighed dramatically. You cry constantly. You barely sleep. You disappear with the baby. Emily, look at yourself. The manipulation was so familiar, it almost worked. Almost. For years those exact words would have made Emily question her sanity. But not anymore. Not after the highway. Not after learning her entire identity may have been stolen. No, Emily said quietly, gripping the phone tighter. You don't get to rewrite this. Silence fell instantly. Then Travis said something that made everyone in the room freeze. "You know," he muttered carefully, "it's funny how rich people suddenly showed up around you." Daniel's face darkened immediately. Rebecca stopped writing. Emily's heartbeat accelerated. "How do you know about Daniel?" she demanded. Travis paused too long. Then came a quiet chuckle. "Mom has friends." The call disconnected. The room remained silent for several seconds afterward. Finally, Daniel spoke grimly. "That wasn't random." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Somebody is feeding them information." Emily looked between them, panic tightening inside her chest again. "You think Travis knows about the Whitmore family?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I think somebody realized exactly who you might be. And now they're moving fast." Emily slowly turned toward her sleeping daughter. Hours earlier, she believed the greatest danger in her life was a failing marriage. Now she understood the truth. This wasn't just about custody anymore. Somebody powerful was terrified she might reclaim the identity they stole from her. The DNA test was supposed to give Emily answers. Instead, it exposed a secret terrifying enough to make someone try to kill Daniel. The storm had finally passed by the time Rebecca returned to the lake house, carrying a sealed medical envelope in her hands. Emily had barely slept. Every creak in the house made her jump. Every passing car outside sent panic through her chest. And now the truth she feared most was sitting only a few feet away on the kitchen table. Daniel stared at the envelope like it might explode. "The lab rushed the results," Rebecca said quietly. Emily's throat tightened instantly. For a moment nobody moved. The only sound came from the soft humming of the refrigerator and the distant wind moving across the lake outside. Finally, Daniel reached for the envelope with trembling hands. Emily could barely breathe watching him tear it open. Rebecca leaned closer while Daniel unfolded the papers slowly. Then his face drained of color. Emily's heartbeat stopped. "What?" she whispered. Daniel looked up at her with eyes filled with shock and grief all at once. "You are Claire's daughter." Emily felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Even though she already suspected it, hearing the words spoken aloud shattered something inside her completely. Her entire life, her name, her childhood, everything had been built on a lie. Tears instantly filled her eyes while Daniel lowered his head into his hands. "Oh God," he whispered brokenly. After all these years, Emily covered her mouth, struggling to process the reality crashing over her all at once. Somewhere out there was a mother who had mourned her as dead for decades, while Emily grew up believing she had simply been unwanted. Rebecca carefully slid another page across the table. "There's more." Daniel looked up sharply. Rebecca's expression turned grave. "The DNA confirms Emily is not only Claire's daughter, she is also the legal heir to the Whitmore estate." Silence exploded across the room. Emily blinked in confusion. "What does that mean?" Daniel answered quietly. "It means everything your grandfather owned was supposed to pass to you." Emily stared at him blankly. "Everything?" Rebecca nodded slowly. "The land, the trust funds, the businesses, millions of dollars." Emily immediately shook her head. "No, I don't care about money." "But somebody else did," Rebecca replied coldly. The realization hit like lightning. Emily suddenly understood why people were panicking after all these years, why files disappeared, why masked intruders searched the house, why Travis suddenly wanted custody. This was never just about family shame. It was about inheritance, power, wealth. Daniel stood up, abruptly pacing across the kitchen. "My brother controlled the estate. After Amelia disappeared," he muttered bitterly. "If Emily came back alive," Rebecca finished the sentence quietly. "Everything changes." Emily's stomach twisted violently. "You think someone stole me because of money?" Before either of them could answer, headlights suddenly flashed through the front windows. All three froze instantly. A black SUV had stopped outside the lake house. Daniel moved toward the curtains carefully while Rebecca reached for her phone. Emily instinctively grabbed her daughter from the bassinet. The SUV engine remained running. Then the driver's door slowly opened. A man stepped out wearing a dark coat and gloves. Even from the window, Emily could feel something terrifying about him. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't rushed. He moved like someone who knew exactly why he was there. Daniel's face suddenly went pale. "No," he whispered. Rebecca looked at him sharply. "What is it?" Daniel stepped backward slowly from the window. "That's Victor." Emily frowned. Who's Victor? Daniel swallowed hard before answering. My brother's former security chief. Emily's blood ran cold. The man outside slowly looked up toward the house as rainwater dripped from his coat. Then incredibly he smiled. A calm, terrifying smile. And seconds later, the power inside the lake house suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed everything. If this shocking revelation changed everything you thought you knew about Emily's disappearance, don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next chapter uncovers who Victor really works for and why Emily's return may put her entire family in deadly danger. The moment the lights went out, Emily realized this was never just about money. Someone wanted her erased forever. Darkness swallowed the lake house so completely that for a second, Emily couldn't even see her own hands. Her daughter immediately began crying in terror somewhere against her shoulder, while rain battered the windows again outside. Rebecca cursed softly near the kitchen counter. Daniel grabbed a flashlight from a drawer and switched it on, the narrow beam cutting sharply through the blackness. Get upstairs, he ordered immediately. Now. Emily didn't argue. Fear was already screaming through every nerve in her body. She clutched her daughter tightly and rushed toward the staircase, while Rebecca dialed emergency services on her phone. But before Emily reached the second floor, a loud metallic crash exploded from the back of the house. Somebody had forced open the rear door. Her entire body froze. Heavy footsteps echoed through the kitchen below. Slow, calm, deliberate. Whoever entered the house wasn't panicking. They weren't rushing. They moved like people who had done this before. Daniel raised the flashlight toward the hallway. Victor, he shouted angrily. This ends tonight. Silence answered him at first. Then a deep voice emerged from the darkness. It should have ended 20 years ago. Emily's blood turned to ice. She crouched halfway up the stairs, holding her daughter against her chest, while trying desperately to stay quiet. The flashlight beam shook slightly in Daniel's hand. You know who she is, Daniel said coldly. That's why you're here. A shadow slowly stepped into the edge of the light. Victor. Tall. Gray-haired. Expressionless. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the hardwood floor. He looked less like a criminal and more like a man arriving for business. You should have stayed out of this, Daniel. Victor replied calmly. Rebecca finally spoke near the kitchen. We already copied the DNA results. Victor's eyes shifted toward her without emotion. Then you've all become a problem. Emily felt her heartbeat pounding so hard, she thought they might hear it upstairs. Her daughter whimpered softly against her shoulder. Victor's head tilted slightly toward the sound. And then, Emily saw something horrifying. Recognition. He knew exactly where she was. Daniel stepped directly between Victor and the staircase. You're not touching her. Victor sighed, almost sadly. You still don't understand, do you? He muttered. This family survived because sacrifices were made. Daniel's voice cracked with rage. You stole a child. Victor's expression finally changed slightly. Not guilt. Irritation. No, he corrected quietly. I protected an empire. Emily's stomach twisted violently. Victor slowly reached into his coat pocket. Rebecca instantly grabbed Daniel's arm. Gun, she whispered. Panic exploded through the room. Daniel shoved the flashlight toward Emily upstairs. Run, he shouted. The next seconds became chaos. Emily sprinted toward the upstairs hallway while Victor lunged forward downstairs. A deafening gunshot exploded through the lake house. Emily screamed instinctively, while her daughter cried hysterically in her arms. Another crash sounded below. Furniture shattered. Rebecca yelled something she couldn't understand. Emily reached the upstairs bedroom and slammed the door shut before locking it. Her hands shook uncontrollably while she backed away from the entrance. Then silence. Complete silence. Emily could barely breathe. Her ears rang violently after the gunshot. Seconds felt like hours. Finally, footsteps approached the bedroom slowly from the hallway outside. Emily's entire body trembled. Someone stopped directly outside the door. Then came 3 soft knocks. Emily covered her mouth to stop herself from crying. Daniel's voice finally spoke through the wood, weak and strained. Emily. Relief flooded her instantly. She rushed forward and unlocked the door. But the moment it opened, her stomach dropped. Daniel was covered in blood. one hand pressed against his side while the other braced against the wall to stay standing. Emily gasped in horror. "Oh my God!" Daniel grabbed her arm tightly before she could scream. His face had gone pale. "Listen to me carefully," he whispered painfully. Victor wasn't acting alone. Emily stared at him in shock. Daniel's voice lowered further. "The person behind all of this," he winced hard, struggling to breathe, "is someone much closer to you than you think. Who do you believe is secretly controlling everything behind Emily's disappearance? Was it Daniel's brother, Diane, or someone nobody suspects yet? Comment your theory below, because the next chapter reveals the most shocking betrayal of all. The person Emily trusted most had been lying to her from the very beginning." Daniel collapsed against the bedroom wall the moment Emily pulled him inside. Blood soaked through his fingers, while Rebecca rushed upstairs carrying towels and her phone, desperately trying to reach emergency responders through the storm-damaged signal. Emily knelt beside Daniel, shaking violently, her daughter crying in the bassinet nearby. "Stay with me," she begged, while pressing trembling hands against his wound. Daniel grabbed her wrist suddenly with surprising strength. "Listen carefully," he whispered painfully. "You don't have much time." Emily's heart pounded wildly. "Who's behind this?" Daniel struggled to breathe for a second, before finally forcing the words out. "Diane." The room went completely silent. Emily stared at him like she had misheard. "No," she whispered instantly. "That's impossible." But deep inside, something already knew. Memories flashed through her mind with horrifying clarity. Diane constantly controlling Travis. Diane criticizing every parenting decision Emily made. Diane pushing her to sign papers she never fully read after the baby was born. Diane always asking strange questions about Emily's adoption records whenever family arguments happened. Rebecca slowly lowered the towel in her hands, face pale with realization. "Oh my God." Emily shook her head violently. "No, she hated me." But she wouldn't. She knew. Daniel interrupted weakly. "Years ago, she worked for a private legal archive connected to the Whitmore estate." Emily felt dizzy. Daniel continued painfully. "She discovered sealed records connected to your disappearance and realized exactly who you were." Rebecca's eyes widened. "That's why Travis married her," she whispered. Daniel nodded once. Diane spent years trying to position her family close to the Whitmore inheritance. Emily couldn't breathe. Every moment of humiliation suddenly felt different now. Every cruel comment, every manipulation, every attempt to make Emily feel weak and dependent. It was never personal hatred alone. Diane had been controlling her because Emily was worth millions and didn't even know it. Tears streamed down Emily's face. "She knew who I was this entire time." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Not at first," he admitted. "But after your daughter was born," Diane ordered a background search connected to the adoption records. Emily remembered Diane suddenly becoming obsessed with legal paperwork after the birth. The questions, the pressure, the fake concern. Her stomach twisted violently. "And Travis," she whispered. Daniel's silence answered everything. Emily felt something inside her finally break. Travis never loved her. Not truly. Maybe he cared in his own selfish way once, but in the end, he chose power, money, and his mother over his own wife and child. Rebecca finally received a weak signal on her phone. "Ambulance is coming," she announced quickly. But before relief could settle in, headlights suddenly flashed outside again. Emily rushed toward the window in panic. Multiple vehicles were pulling into the driveway. "Police." Daniel exhaled shakily. "Good," he whispered. But Rebecca's expression darkened instead of relaxing. "Wait." Emily turned sharply. "What?" Rebecca slowly looked toward the front door below. Why would local police arrive this fast during a storm? The realization hit instantly. Daniel looked terrified. Because Diane called them first. Seconds later, fists slammed against the downstairs door. "Police department open." Immediately, Emily's blood froze. Daniel grabbed her hand desperately. "Listen to me," he whispered painfully. "People with power survive because victims stay silent." Tears poured down Emily's face while her daughter cried beside her. Daniel squeezed her hand tighter. "Don't let them rewrite your story." Downstairs, the pounding on the door grew louder. Emily slowly looked down at her child and finally understood the most important truth of all. Fear keeps dangerous people powerful. Silence protects abusers. And sometimes the hardest thing a person can do is finally tell the truth out loud. In the end, Emily's story became bigger than stolen money, hidden identities, or family betrayal. It became a reminder that manipulation often hides behind charm, that emotional abuse can feel invisible until it nearly destroys you, and that trusting your instincts may save your life long before proof ever appears. Some people will spend years convincing you that your pain is imaginary, because controlling your self-doubt is easier than controlling the truth. But the moment you stop apologizing for your own survival, everything changes forever. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside Emily's nightmare. The people who truly love you will never punish you for being vulnerable, afraid, exhausted, or broken. They protect you. They believe you. They stay.